Previously on Classroom Hacks.
You could have a great conversation, they eat it up, they laugh at your jokes, it's funny, you're the king of the world, and then your 9 a.m. class walks in and it's crickets. It's like pulling teeth. And you say to yourself, this lesson plan killed at 8 a.m., and then you start resenting your 9 a.m. kids, and you hate the world, and you hate yourself, and then 11 or 10 o'clock rolls around, and then they love it again, and you're high on the lesson plan again. So you have to just kind of go with the wave, and like Carrie said, don't sweat it. There's tomorrow. It's another day. Do better. Figure out what works. You can do it again next time. You can change things up. Find out what works. Build on it. Try to just transfer it to another lesson plan. See what doesn't work. Revise it. Get rid of it. Do something different. That's the joy of it. You are the creator. You can do these things.
It's ever changing.
yourself.
It's not always the same. That's what I like about it.
Hello, everyone. We hope you enjoyed that short clip from last week's episode titled It's My First Day. You can listen to all of our previous episodes on SoundCloud. Simply type in Classroom Hacks in the search bar, and all the episodes should pop up for you. Feel free to also check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages to receive daily advice, tips, humor, and information pertaining to discounts for educators. On today's episode, we discuss personality. We all have one, but, as we all know, personalities are like snowflakes. Everyone has one, but everyone's is different. However, it doesn't mean that we can't take what we learn, shape our personality around it, and then integrate it into our classrooms. So, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy Classroom Hacks Episode 6, Personality Test.
Why are you passionate about doing this?
Well, because I was kicked out of my house recently, and I need to pretend like I still have a social life.
Some side money?
Exactly. Well, oddly enough, this is what we're going to be sort of talking about today
Is
is
there a topic here?
personality tests. Well, bringing our personality into the class. I just
Okay.
labeled it as personality test because I figured it'd be more catchy of a line to kind of have in there.
Yeah, so the listener's thinking we might be doing a Myers-Briggs
Yeah.
or something
exactly.
like that.
You know, what's funny is that on the way to work today, I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about people trying to be something they're not. And I think a lot of times instructors feel they might have to go into a class and put on a show. And so sometimes it takes away from who they really might be. And as we talked about episode 1, that can also benefit you sometimes, but can also take away from who you are. Before we get into all of that, and Pedro, I scared him for a second because he wasn't expecting me just to scream all of a sudden.
And the coffee's still kicking in, so.
Absolutely. But this is live from the Pantheon of Pedagogy, the mecca of methodology, your vacation from vacation, your teaching therapy session where you can learn to seriously take teaching not so seriously. This is and we are Classroom Hacks.
And Eric, can we consider ourselves pedagogical bartenders?
That's a good one. I could use that in the next one.
No, it's so funny. The other day I was thinking, doing a podcast, and the idea being, well, what if people are listening to us and they're thinking, well, who the heck are you two guys to do a podcast? Who are you? Why should I listen to you? And it's more so the idea of, in a sense that's true though, like, right, who in the heck are we? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's as if we're a bunch of teachers sitting around talking, swapping ideas, and so we're just sharing some ideas we've heard, we've learned. If you, the listener, were doing a podcast, we'd have a lot to learn from you guys as well. So we're not here because we've got it all down pat. We just love talking about this stuff, and we have a microphone.
Absolutely. And a little update for anyone who might be listening is that we have branched out a little bit on Classroom Hacks here, so you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Twitter, you can find us on duringofficehours.com. We are looking for people who might be interested in also talking about their experiences, because as Pedro just said, it's a conversation, and we're not trying to discriminate against anyone. This is a very inclusive atmosphere, so we would like to hear any of your stories, anything that you might want to contribute or even complain about, because that's what we're here for.
Wait, you called me Pedro. I don't think we gave our names at the beginning of this podcast.
We didn't. You're absolutely right.
And who are you, pray tell?
Sometimes I ask myself that every morning when I look in the mirror. Who are you?
Well, I don't mean existentially. I mean
Okay.
just
Well, I'm Eric Tan. And you are?
Peter Canetis. And Eric will sometimes call me Pedro. I'm not sure how that started. What was that from? I mean, is that from, you sometimes call me Friendo
Yeah.
from No Country for Old Men, which I still think is a backdoor insult.
Well, we always talk about that. And,
Yes.
I don't see how it can be considered a backdoor insult when he said it in the movie right before he was about to murder somebody.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So how is that supposed to make me feel?
but then again, he flipped the coin. We didn't flip the coin yet.
No. Yeah, I am going to be the one who has to call it then?
So you inherited it. And every now and then you might hear a
movie
line, an inside gag from certain things. A few episodes ago, you probably heard the intro to a similar sounding Twilight Zone sort of episode. We hope you enjoy those intros and commercials. But we also want to get to what we're talking about, which today, as the episode title would indicate, is called personality tests. The reason we bring this up is because every instructor has their own personality. It's hard to not be some sort of extension of who you are when you come into the classroom, but a lot of times instructors might feel like they have to sometimes be someone they're not. And a lot of times you'll find that working to your strengths is usually the best instead of becoming something that you're not comfortable with or someone that you can't recognize when you look in the mirror. And so we'll take a couple of personality test questions right here, right now, and maybe just to figure out who we are as people. And you can follow along if you're listening. And I'll ask this to Pedro, and then you can ponder this question yourself. Why teaching and not something else? Pedro.
Oh, I have to answer this?
Yeah.
Why teaching it?
To get a gist of who you are as a person.
One of the main answers to that would be the role that a handful of teachers have played in my life. I've had teachers who have inspired me, have given me insights, given me wisdom, given me knowledge, sometimes about the actual subject matter, but also oftentimes it was beyond that. It wasn't just what they were saying about the actual subject matter. It was overall life stuff. And it's a way to really impact people. You know, we look at, we're shaped by a lot of people, of course, our family, our friends, but teachers, as you know, can play a role in that. And so because I was so positively influenced, I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing the same thing, whether it was in teaching or in some other capacity, but teaching just happened to be the one that, the only people that hired me.
we managed to trick the institution a lot easier than it was to trick Google when we applied there.
Yeah, and how about you? Why do you do it?
You know, it's funny because this episode is about personality. And one thing I do want to point out is that both Pedro and I are college instructors, which is different than obviously high school instructors. One of the reasons why I've always liked college teaching is because it's not your typical 9-to-5 job. I've worked in retail, I've worked in different capacities for different jobs, and the 9-to-5 is something that never stuck with me. I needed a bit more flexibility. I like the idea of being creative, and that is something that teaching allows you to do, especially at a college level, because when you teach a liberal arts class or you teach a philosophy class or an English class, you can talk about subjects that you might not be able to talk about in a grade school level and a high school level. You don't necessarily work the 9-to-5 schedule that can sometimes feel a bit complacent. So that's partially one of the reasons why I enjoy teaching at the level that we do.
Now, I did teach high school for several years
Exactly.
before teaching college.
Can you give us some insight into the variances?
Well, just one thing I want to comment on, because I'm sure we might have high school teachers who will be like, hey, wait a minute, it's very creative. You do have the creativity in terms of your lesson planning and presenting lessons with creativity and gusto and ingenuity. But you're right, though. There is that structured You have to be there at a certain time. You leave at a certain time. And some people like that. But you're right, it goes into personality types. Some personalities like that type of structure. Others, like yourself, don't. But one reason why I wanted to teach college eventually was to just to be able to, in some areas, go deeper. But every level is important. You know, college teachers couldn't do their job without high school teachers, and high school teachers couldn't do their job without middle school teachers, so on and so forth.
It's all the chain. It's all connected.
Yes.
And funny enough, and I do apologize if I was not clear earlier. I did not mean by any stretch of the
We
imagination.
can edit this part out.
Yeah. That high school instructors and teachers are not creative, because in fact, I've probably seen some of the most creative minds come out of high school. Actually, in one of the bonus episodes of this season, we talked with high school friend of ours. Creativity comes as an extension of your personality, and that's something that I think we can bring out in our classes. And today we'll try to share a couple of examples of those for you as well. What aspects of yourself do you say you do expose in the classroom in terms of your personality? And one thing I will say is that if you've ever walked by one of Peter's classrooms early in the morning, maybe 8, 9 a.m., you might hear some music playing outside the door. You don't always hear that when you walk by a class. Why do you play the music you play, and what kind of music do you play?
And this is, Eric, means before class starts. I mean, I sometimes, like many teachers, will use music or a movie clip or a TV clip or something in class. But sometimes, a variety of reasons, I want to create a culture in the classroom where it's fun, they feel comfortable, it's a way to bond. I take requests. I tell them, okay, who wants to give me some pre-class music? And I do have one, what's the word I'm looking for, criterion, is it can't be something that's too, I joke, I say parental advisory, explicit, only because I don't know what offends people.
Sure, you can't
in
have
class.
them play straight out of Compton.
Yeah, I mean,
NWA.
again, students might like that, and that's fine. But if it's going to distance 4 or 5 students from me, but genre is up for grabs. It could be classical, it could be hip hop, it could be rock,
Some
it could
Conway
be
Twitty.
classical, Conway Twitty. It could be Jethro Tull. I mean, it could be a whole variety. So yeah, just to wake us up, to connect, have some fun before class starts.
I like the idea of the requests, but remember, you have to treat it as if you were a radio DJ and not a club DJ, where you can take radio requests that you would be able to play on the radio, but not requests you could play at the club. So that's always something, students, always something to keep in mind if you happen to take
I like that distinction. That's a good distinction.
philosophy or religion or ethics. And oddly enough, it's an ethical dilemma right there. One of the aspects that I like to expose is that I love culture. I love pop culture. Pedro and I both love movies. Sometimes in class, I like to utilize either short Sundance films. There's a website for short Sundance films of the week. And a lot of times if I'm doing an example for a narrative short story or a piece about themselves, I might show a short clip from a movie or a flash fiction piece from the Sundance site to kind of show them how you can put together a quality narrative even in a short amount of time. However, one thing I did learn early on in my career is that though I might like something, I might have an affinity for animation, an affinity for culture, an affinity for movies, is not to overdo it. There is the idea that you may like something and you might want to say, let me show a 5-minute clip here, maybe 8, 9 minutes, but you have to be mindful that if you have a 50-minute class and you're showing a 15, 20-minute piece, that you're taking a huge chunk out of your lesson. And then at the same time, you have to figure out how to integrate that and explain it and analyze those different things. So it's something to always keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Switching gears for a second, I remember one of the times where I was evaluated as a teacher. It was our very own beloved Mark Collins.
Okay.
And he's wonderful. He has a doctorate in education, and he's one of the deans here who teaches teachers how to teach. And so he'll evaluate us and give feedback. And one thing I learned from Mark, I learned many things that were very helpful, especially with student-centered teaching, learner-centered teaching. When we were talking, he would give examples of things he would do in class. Now, I walked away thinking, man, those are great ideas, and I tried to incorporate some of them, but they didn't work well. And they weren't really assignments or types of, I mean, more so like the way he would interact with students or some of the things he tried, some of the ways he jokes. That fit his personality. And that was very consistent with who he is. But when I tried to do it, it wasn't me. So it wasn't as natural. It wasn't as, so stuff that you do in the classroom, Eric, based on your personality that works really well, it's stuff that I couldn't do because of my personality. We have different, or areas where we're different in our personalities, and so it's going to come through in how we teach.
You are absolutely right. And when we come back from our commercial break, we're going to talk about some of the different activities and assignments or projects that we might have used in our class that worked with our personality, or that might have been outside of the box that we normally didn't do, but we figured out a way to cultivate them. And I'll also talk to you about a great example that I heard in regards to, as Peter just said, in regards to trying to become someone you're not, and the difficulty that you might face when trying to understand how to take an assignment from someone else or advice from someone else and make it your own. So we will be back right after this short commercial break.
Or like the time you pulled the fire alarm just to get out of giving the exam.
Like I said, we'll be back after this short commercial break. Hello, everyone. Just want to give a quick shout out to Writing on the Edge, the annual conference developed by part-time faculty for part-time faculty. It's Writing on the Edge's 4th year. And this year, the title of the conference is Composing Beyond Boundaries. It takes place Saturday, October 20th at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And this year, they are opening up the conference to any faculty that uses writing and multimodal projects in their classes. They're excited to see how new practices are used across the curriculum and invite you to come experience the only writing conference put on by and for adjuncts and contingent faculty in the Midwest. They have it competitively priced at only $35 for a whole day of professional development. They will have a keynote speaker on writing across the curriculum and breakout sessions given by fellow instructors. Writing on the Edge is looking for interactive proposals that show how you use writing and multimodal concepts in the classroom. Moreover, they're interested in hearing about your personal insight, the advantages and disadvantages of being an adjunct or part-time faculty. Please consider putting in a proposal this year and also sending this to anyone you think would benefit from this conference. Preference will be given to adjunct and contingent faculty, but full-time faculty can submit proposals too. Please note, proposals are due by Friday, June 15th, and you can email your proposals to wote@cod.edu. That's WOTE@cod.edu. That's Writing on the Edge, Composing Beyond Boundaries. And we're back. One of the things that this episode is focusing on is the idea of personality. And I was listening to This American Life the other day, and there was a great piece called Becoming a Badger. And essentially the underlying theme was just what we're talking about here. People trying to become something they're not. And there was a great example on there. There's a famous French comedian by the name of Gad Elmaleh. I believe that's the correct pronunciation of his name, though I didn't say it in French, so it probably isn't.
I bet you the first name is pronounced
like God, Gad.
Or something, because I remember in French there was a French tennis player whose name was like Guy Forget.
Oh, I see.
But if you read it with an American or English, it's Guy Forget.
Oh.
But it's like Guy Forget.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, sorry, go ahead.
And he apparently is this huge comedian in France. He's one of the most famous French comedians. He got to a point where he was so famous that he joked about his fame, was some of his jokes on stage. He felt he reached a plateau, so he decided, you know what, I want to become a famous American comedian. So he decided to take his talents and bring them over to America. He also tried to take his French jokes and simply convert them to American jokes. What he shortly realized is that it doesn't work that way, that the cultures are different, the cadence is different, the humor is different, the delivery is different. He even found out things to the degree of that Americans are very concise. They want delivery quicker. They don't want as much buildup or narrative when it comes to his jokes, which he was able to do in his French stand-up. And that kind of translates to what we're talking about today, as Peter brought up earlier in regards to the commentary about being given advice and then simply saying, well, can I take what was given to me and then simply incorporate it into my classroom? We're going to come to find that we have to learn to tweak these things, that we have to work at our strengths and emphasize different things to make certain advice or insight or perspective useful in our own class that might have been given to us by someone else. So did you want to add to that what you were talking about earlier, Pedro?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great story to bring in. This reminds me of one time when I was evaluated as a teacher. It was here at COD, and it was Mark Collins, Dr. Mark Collins. Now, for those of you who don't know Mark Collins, this guy he's larger than life. He's funny, he's smart. He is the Dean of Adjunct Faculty Development. Is that the correct name? I might be getting his title a little off.
He gets a lot of parallel shifts, so his title is somewhat liquid. It tends to change.
It is, yeah, it's a fluid title. But he is one of the deans here, and one of his main responsibilities is he teaches teachers how to teach, and he's very, very good at that. He's really had a big impact on my teaching. And when I first met with him, this is years ago, and we were talking about his feedback from his observation of my class. And one thing that I walked away, or one of the things I walked away with was, Mark is funny. I like to be, well, at least I try to be funny in class. And let me take some of his jokes or his style, his delivery, and I tried to incorporate it as my own because it was very successful for him. Well, when I tried it, it didn't work. It fell flat because who Mark is and who I am, I mean, different people we're different in some ways. And so when I tried to quote unquote be him, though I wouldn't have put it that way back then, as I was doing it, it didn't work well because it didn't flow naturally from who I am. And so when I just took what he said and filtered it through who I am and applied his knowledge, his wisdom, his advice, and incorporated it with who I am and how I operate already, then it was much more natural, much more comfortable, much more had a better results with students. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense.
All right, you were just checking your emails right now.
I was actually checking duringofficehours.com, a great place that you can go to teach, share, and learn. And I'll go a little bit more into that as I have at the end of these episodes. But
and for our listening audience, sometimes when I go a little bit too long in my explanation, Mark starts to play solitaire on his laptop.
Mark starts to just drift away into the unknown.
Yeah.
And I ask him...
I actually meant Eric starts to play solitaire.
And Mark, I'll ask Mark, where do you go, Mark?
Hey, I figured out who this was, by the way. I'll tell you later. Okay.
A little off.
A little ADD moment.
There you go. So one of the questions then I have for you, Pedro, and we can both build on this. What are some assignments or projects that you might attach your personality to, or that you feel you might give that maybe speak to who you are? I can go first if you'd like me to.
Yeah, you go first because I have a couple ideas, but I don't want to... You caught me off guard with this good question.
I do apologize.
Well, I'm just trying to think of a way to phrase it.
Sure.
But if you go ahead first.
So one of the projects I like to use, and this will also be an extension to one of our later episodes entitled Group Projects or Group Activities, is I have a submission on duringofficehours.com. Again, that's duringofficehours.com. It's an activity that you can either use for in an individual or for groups. It's called Analyzing Privilege. And one of the things that I like about this particular activity is that I have a strong affinity for having social communication, especially among my students. I like to have conversations, thus why we have this podcast. And I like to get other students involved with one another and have them find out about one another. And one of the issues that tends to come up with privilege is that oftentimes we might just associate privilege with just race, or that, someone who might be a certain skin color might be less privileged, but then we sort of wash that away and think that's the only thing that comes with privilege. But privilege can also be associated to class. It can be also associated with physical capabilities, emotional health, spiritual health. It can be associated with language barriers. And so the activity essentially takes a look at a privilege quiz that was put up, and it kind of just goes down these 100 different questions like, do you come from a family of divorce? Do you have to take prescription medication? Have you ever had to ride the bus to work? And so I have the students get together, they take the privilege quiz, they sort of talk to each other about the difficulties or the times in their life where maybe they felt less privileged, and then they see where their score might be. And the reason I do this is because it gets them to see a real life person and gets them to understand them, because sometimes you might just hear something on the news and we just look at people maybe like a statistic. And then when you see someone in real life and you realize a lot of the things they had to go through that maybe you don't have to go through, you realize that maybe I am a bit more privileged in certain things. And how can I help or assist other people in that way? And so you kind of get this firsthand experience. Students see the quiz, it's a physical thing, they take it, they actually get the time to sit down and talk with one another. So it's a great way for them to sort of bond initially, and it's a great way for them to sort of see outside of their own comfort zone. And so that's one of those things for me personally that I like to experience from people, that I like to see where they come from, I like to understand their process, I like to see some of their trials and tribulations, and hopefully it can make me a better person to understand them a bit better.
Yeah, that's a great point. That last thing you just said, it's funny because students will sometimes think that as teachers and we're standing before them that everything we're teaching, we've got it down pat. We've got it all figured out. We've got it all together. And so I tell them, I said, no, anything we do in here is if we're working on some skill, whether it's communication or critical thinking or listening or writing, whatever it is, I tell them none of us have fully arrived. We can all grow and develop and get better. Be students of our craft, if you will. And so that's just one thing I wanted to add at that last point. And building on what you just said, one thing I like to do is in classes, I try to convey the idea to them that life is really about relationships. Whether it's personally, professionally, we just want to be with people that we like. Going back to movies for a second, that's why many directors will use the same actors over and over again. They like them, they're friends, they know they're good, they're dependable, they're reliable, they're not going to show up wasted on the set or cause big problems. And it works that way in life. I mean, a conversation we might have with someone standing in line at Starbucks might turn out to be a job opportunity or a future maid of honor or best man at your wedding. We don't know. And so I try to incorporate a big social component in the class. Teaching philosophy and religion, I think like many classes, it's best done in community. And I know extroverted students thrive in this, and it's a little harder, sometimes a lot harder for introverted students, but I really try to create the atmosphere of, you know what, say it. Don't worry about if it's perfect. Don't worry about if it's all polished and pristine. I said, just say it. We can work with it. And this is, of course, during class discussions. Because we get to practice. We get to practice because job interviews, it's scary. Meeting someone for the first time or that person you like, that you're maybe a coworker or a person at a party, and you want to talk to them because you're interested in them, that's scary. But if we can practice in the classroom, I tell them. Because I come from a sports background and a theater background, so it's practice, practice, practice. And the more we can practice here, and I tell them this is an environment to practice. You can fall on your face here, and it's okay. And it's the old Marine, I think it's a Marine slogan, the more we sweat in training, the less we'll bleed in battle. So if we can practice in the classroom, get the social aspect, work on our people skills, our soft skills, as they say, that's a payoff in life. And not just as a student, but just as a human being.
100% true, 100% accurate. One thing I will always remind my students is that I would give anything to be a student again. And to be on the other side of the desk at the time when they're in that bubble and they are a student, they think, I got so many things I got to worry about. I have so many things I'm anxious about. I got to study for this. I got to put this project together. I have to write this paper. But really, you're in a place that you are given the opportunity to fail, but not fail in the point that you can't recover, not fail to the point where you can't learn, but fail to the point where you can grow. Whereas in the real world, sometimes when you fail, you may not get a chance to bounce back, and you'll have to figure that out the hard way. Take the advantages that you can in school. And the same thing can be said to instructors the first time around, is we say this on the podcast as well. Take your work seriously, but take yourselves lightly. Don't beat yourself up about each class, each day, each minute.
That's hard.
It is, because
That's hard.
Because sometimes things aren't going to go over well, and if you get hung up on something that didn't go well in one class, you could potentially lose great conversation in another class. And that will probably be where we wrap up this episode. On the next episode of Classroom Hacks, we'll take on a topic that is very current, that appears to be the shift in some of the pedagogical landscape, and that is student versus teacher-centered learning. So I'm interested to talk about that. Pedro, anything else you'd like to say before we bon voyage out of here?
Eric, I think you wrapped it up quite eloquently, as always.
Well, if it's wrapped up and good to go, I'll just put a stamp on it and then send it on its merry way. This has been Classroom Hacks. We'll see you guys next time. Arrivederci.